Welcome back. This is Roy with Air Pro Coaching coming to you with episode number 13, and we go on the road to interview Dr. Val Valley. She is a clinical sports psychologist working at the IMG Academy, working with all types of athletes, and we wanted to steal some of her time because we talk a lot about in these podcasts about the physical approach, nutrition, strength, but we seldom talk about probably one of the most important limiters of most people, and that's their mindset or their mental approach. We wanted to give you a few tools that you could implement tomorrow in building your, I call it mental toolbox. The more tools you have in that, the greater chance for success. I believe that we're leaving 30 to 60% of our potential on the table by not being mentally strong. So most people only reach about 40% of their potential, and the mental approach is how they can close that gap. And Dr. Val is awesome. She kills it on this interview. She gives great information, tools that you could take away right away. And I think the best part of Dr. Val is that she is a practitioner. She's a high-end athlete. She's not one of these clinical people who are only book smart or preaching it, but they're not living it. She lives it. She is she hired me at the beginning of the year to coach her. So I've coached her for a year, and she is a high-end athlete, national champ. She won national champs. If you look at my last podcast, a few on the case review, and we talked about a multi-sport athlete who won nationals. This is her. She is the one that did that. I did not want to reveal that without her permission. I also did not want to steal her knowledge until the end of the year because I wanted to, I don't know, for the lack of a better term, vet her, because the people that we bring into our podcast, we want to make sure that they're practitioners. We brought Ken Vita in. He's a Masters national champ. As we bring people in, we want them to be practitioners. I'm not bringing theorists into this. I'm not bringing people who are educated, but they don't practice it. So Dr. Val is not also somebody who lives it and teaches it. So the words that come out of her mouth have a lot of value, in my opinion. Now, we are on the scene at the Bikery in St. Pete, so the audio has some distraction in the background, but we thought it was a great time to steal an hour of Dr. Val's time. We were waiting for Bob Roll and Bobby Julich to show up. They were doing a little talk at the Bikery. There was an event on Sunday, so this interview happened on Saturday. On Sunday, we got to ride with some legends. So we got to ride with Bobby Julich, third in the Tour de France. We got to ride with Bob Key, who is a great rider, super phenomenal athlete, and the voice of the Tour de France. He's on, you'll see him all over the tour. And then George Hincapie made a surprise appearance. So we were able to ride with him, about 6 of my athletes. We got to do about 60 miles. We pushed it pretty hard. I think they were surprised. We had a good time, and I know all of my athletes, that was probably the highlight of probably their cycling career at this point, to get to ride with 3 legends and just to mix it up in a really just like a training ride. It was really fun. So anyway, nonetheless, this is a great interview. I hope you guys enjoy it, listen in, and if you have any questions, hit us up on Instagram, Facebook. If it's something you have a question for Dr. Val, go ahead and post it. I'm sure she will be willing to answer it. I'll send it to her. She's not really big on social media, which is great for her, but she did give us this opportunity to listen in on some super knowledge. So I hope you guys learn a lot, and as always, up your watts. Welcome back to Aero Pro Coaching. This is Roy, and this podcast, we're bringing to you a guest, very special guest, Dr. Val Valley. Dr. Val Valley. She is a sports, I'm going to mess this up, a sports psychologist, a PhD. She works at the IMG Academy. This last year, I worked with her. She hired me as her coach. And it was a great experience to work with her. So I thought bringing her in and talking a little bit about her journey with the training, but also her journey with like where she came from, her background. And I'm going to hit her up with a bunch of Q&A because I have a lot of athletes who could definitely benefit from her knowledge. And we are here on site at the Bikery doing this podcast. And so Bob Roll's coming in today. And we figure we'd jump in, steal some time with Val. She lives in St. Pete right now. working at the IMG Academy. So I want to welcome Val, Dr. Val, here. So Dr. Val, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. So just to clarify, I'm not a PhD, I'm a PsyD. So PsyD is a doctor of psychology, PhD is a doctor of philosophy, slightly different training model. But I'm a sports psychologist, and what that means is that I'm a clinical psychologist by training who specializes in working with athletes. So I work along the whole continuum of mental health, from diagnosis and treating mental illness on the one hand to using psychological skills to optimize performance on the other hand.
Nice. So with that, let's start back. Where are you from?
Yeah, I'm actually from right here in South St. Pete, born and raised. My parents were first generation Italian immigrants, so they had no athletic background. They didn't do any kind of competitive sports, but they got my brother and I into swimming because they thought that's an important thing, here, with water surrounding our state. And so, yeah, I learned to swim. I'm right here at North Shore Pool, and have been swimming competitively ever since.
And did you grow up swimming what age did you start swimming?
Yeah, I started at 3, so just regular kind of just like lessons, safety lessons. And then from there, by 5, I was kind of at the youth, the earliest kind of I don't know, team you could get into, and we were doing little meets, summer swim league stuff, and just really just kind of never stopped throughout high school after that.
And then in high school you swam then?
Yeah, I swam competitively throughout, really from 5 all the way to 18. I was better than average, but not one of those people who was destined to, go to college and be one of those top recruits or anything like that. So I was always, up there, but yeah.
So in high school, what was your mental game in high school? What would you say your mental toolbox was there? I mean, did you see that early on that's something that you wanted to follow, or did it not come till later?
As a swimmer, I think intuitively, I understood, there's really talented swimmers, really gifted ones, and yet they weren't the ones who were always winning the races. And so I understood at an early age, it's there's something else that's, that's going on here. When I went to college, I knew, I just wanted to marry my 2 passions for sport and psychology. So it's been, a great marriage ever since. Never looked back. And so I've always just been interested in, what is the difference that allows some performers just to, reach their potential and just kind of reach those outer limits versus others who potentially are more talented on paper to not.
And so we're going to touch on that, because that's one of the questions I have. You just touched on something that's super important. In sports, you have people that have all the talent in the world, and then you see these people who have, on paper, less talent, but they perform better. So we'll kind of talk about that as you move along. Mm-hmm. So you go to high school, you're a good swimmer, better than average, kind of start to curiosities about how mindset, how the motivation, mental side of it, and then you go to college. Did you go to college with that in mind, hey, I'm going to follow sports psych?
Absolutely, and to the chagrin of my parents, because at that time in the 90s, sports psychology, no one was doing sports psychology, or not applied sports psychology yet. So, which made me want to do it even more. So I was really studying psychology, at a just kind of general level. And then in graduate school is where I specialized and focused on a clinical psychology program with a specialty in sport and performance psychology.
Nice. So where did you go to school?
My undergrad was at the University of Florida, so in Gainesville. Go Gators.
It's interesting. And then, and what did you get there? What was your undergrad?
Psychology.
Psychology. Mm-hmm. And then did you go right into a PhD?
No, so I took a couple of years off, gallivanted around the world. I wasn't quite ready for the responsibility of the real world yet, so I worked for Club Med for about 2 years, and I was a sailing instructor and a snorkeling instructor by day, and on stage by night.
So when you worked at Club Med,
Yeah.
so you did sports stuff. Did you use any of your psych background, or no? It just
Not in a formal way.
okay, nice. So informal.
But I was always fascinated about like human behavior. I mean, why do people do it as they do, even when it's not beneficial and they know that? So, and I'm still curious about that.
So, like, give us one good story from your Club Med.
Oh,
yeah, one
no,
good story.
No.
We need one good story because you can't go, hey, very seldom do we meet somebody who is in the inner workings of Club Med, so we need one good story from that, just one. It doesn't have to be too crazy. But.
Mostly it was like a period in my life where I had the opportunity to do all these kind of wild and crazy things that I never would have done outside of Club Med, like be on stage. I would never expose myself to the spotlights and things like that. But there it wasn't a choice. Like you just by day worked like your beach team, and by night you provide the entertainment. And so probably one of the things I'll never forget is my first day, my first village rolling in. I was told that I was going to be on stage that night for their Folly show, which is like a French kind of can display of feathers galore and fishnet stockings. So any shyness that I ever had was quickly extinguished.
So then you finish this period, and then when do you say, hey,
Yeah.
I want to go back to school? Like
Yeah.
I want to pursue this a
Yep.
little bit further. Like, because a lot of people, like, they get their psychology degree, they find another job in another field, or they become a school counselor or something, but you take it obviously to the next level.
Yeah, it was. I don't know how. It was just something internally that's kind of like this time clock. I don't know. They just said it's time to go, and it's time to get into school mode. So I did my PsyD at Argosy University, which is the Arizona School of Professional Psychology. So I moved from Florida to the Southwest in Phoenix, and spent a good 5 years there. And that's where I really got in deep and really understanding the principles of psychology and sport. And then from there, did an internship and a postdoc, and have been really working with collegiate athletes and now youth athletes ever since.
So, in your undergrad, give us something that you learned in your undergrad that maybe some athletes can learn from. So, let's separate grad from undergrad. So, in your undergrad, what did you learn there? What maybe one or two key things that maybe you can pull from that either has helped you in sport, or helped somebody that you're working with, or somebody you've spoken to? What did you learn in your undergrad?
Yeah, probably one of the most important classes I had was just a foundational or introductory sports psychology class at Florida. And it was there that I learned progressive muscle relaxation. And so that is definitely something that I use as a skill for myself when I'm racing and for my athletes. And so the essentials of progressive muscle relaxation is to really kind of a bottom-up model of tapping into that parasympathetic nervous system to regulate emotions. And so we're relaxing all those kind of autonomic systems around blood pressure and heart rate and muscle tension with the breath and with other just kind of visual cues where we tense the muscles and then release the muscles kind of systematically, one muscle group at a time.
So let's dive into that, because I've heard of this before, practiced it, probably not so to any great success, but so for example, do you have a starting point? Do you start from the bottom, from your feet, and then work your way up, or do you start from the way down?
Either way, it just depends on the individual. And so, so I usually do a top-down model. So, I might just kind of guide an athlete with just kind of relaxing kind of the muscles around the face, around the cheeks, the eyes, the jaw. A lot of tension is in the jaw. And so again, it's by both tensing, so they kind of realize what the tension feels like, and then letting go and knowing what that feels like. And then over time, a lot of times we just take away the tensing and just do the releasing, as now we know how to do that. And so then it's just passive progressive muscle relaxation versus the active progressive muscle relaxation.
So the tension allows a rookie to feel that area.
Yeah, exactly.
Where a veteran who's done this knows to just release that area.
Yeah, so if we were to do it right now, I'd say, all right, take your right hand and tense your fist as hard as you can, as hard as you can, as hard as you can. Keep squeezing, squeezing, and then let it go. Just completely let it go.
So breathing too.
Yeah.
Releasing the breath as well.
Yeah.
And then it feels light.
Yeah.
Right.
And so again, it's really biofeedback for our brain and nervous system to understand what happens physiologically and psychologically when we are in a state of tension or anxiety, and really how usually not productive that is, and so then how to release it.
So you're coaching, the way I see this, and so let's take a swim for example. Swimmers, if I go and watch a triathlon, at the beginning of a triathlon, everyone is tense. Everybody's tense, a lot of people are tense, and I'm sure you observe it, but I observe it, and I watch people that are super tense. Start of a road race, everyone's tense. So this is something where you could potentially tighten, release, and relax.
Absolutely.
And would that be a proper application of that, or would it? I would assume. I'll let you speak on
Yeah, for the beginner who's still maybe not aware of where they hold tension in their body, naturally, yes. For someone who already kind of has that skill set, they don't need to tense anymore. They can just cue themselves to, notice that, and just release it. And it's kind of like, oh, hey, neck, there you are. Let me breathe into that and just let my shoulders just kind of drop.
That's awesome. So in the early stages, maybe you set time, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, whatever, to go through maybe the entire body of doing that. And then over time you create awareness. And then at that point you show up to race day and you feel that tension in your head, your legs, whatever, neck. And then at that point you can release that tension.
Absolutely.
And what does tension cause? Like when somebody's tense, so whether it's in road racing or triathlon or any sport, you coach or you work with a lot of athletes, coach a lot of athletes in a lot of sports. What does tension cause?
So how is it caused is the one question, and then what does it do? What does it create?
Yeah, both. You can answer both. That's a great. Yeah.
Well, psychologically, I'm probably even more interested on how, because what creates stress and anxiety and that tension for you is going to be different than me.
Yep.
Why? That's based on our perception of the situation and based on our perception of our ability to cope with it. And so, I think that's the coolest thing that I learned actually later in my studies, which is the cognitive model. And this is from Aaron T. Beck, who basically said that, it's not, we once thought that it was the stimulus equals response, but actually it's stimulus gap response, and in that gap is our cognitions, our thoughts, our perceptions. This is all learned behavior, and so how I'm perceiving the situation, again, my ability to cope, is then going to have a direct relationship to my emotions, that physiological response, and that behavioral response. So what we're really trying to train athletes to do under pressure situations is through adaptation, but through mental skills on how to create that ideal response set to pressure. And so part of that is then first the awareness and knowing what those maybe maladaptive patterns of thinking are that, again, create that stress response, and then how to both top down and bottom up change the perceptions through cognitive reframing, but also create those skills as far as self-regulation and emotional regulation for the nervous system to create that consistency so that we can really more consistently be playing at our zone or just potential level.
So you say top down, bottom up. Explain that a little bit.
So top down, what I mean by top down is like really looking at thinking first, and again perceptions and how that influences emotions, physiology, and behavior. And bottom up is more working from like that nervous system response and that behavioral response to also change perception, because it's all linked. And so so athlete A can be at race venue and think, oh shit, right? This is going to be terrible. Like, I'm going to suffer. I'm going to come in last. My training wasn't good enough. And so you can just already imagine now the tension that's happening in the muscles, what's going on physiologically. Is that fight or flight response from the parasympathetic nervous system is starting to turn up, the sympathetic nervous system is starting to turn up. There's probably as that tension comes in, now perhaps that just response, whatever it is that the sport is going to also be more strained and tense. There's going to be more errors. And that is actually probably going to reinforce in those thoughts of, this sucks, this is terrible, I'm not going to be able to finish this is awful. So top-down model, really looking at what those maladaptive thought patterns are and creating more adaptive ones to change that response set.
So this is great. So you get into a race. I'm going to give an example, and I want to, if you can tell me what you would tell someone to fix that. So I'm going to use road racing for an example. So road racing, we show up, right? We have these tensions, these patterns that we haven't broken. So because in my opinion, there's a reason why winners win. Like the same person wins and wins. And it's not always genetics, and I think that we're kind of on the same page of that. Yeah, there are those people, but there are those people who fall into that same pattern over and over again. So maybe they had some bad experiences, whatever, success, failures, whatever. They get into the race, they get into the moment, and then they're feeding, like this happens, and it's feeding that into them, like, oh shit, I did that again, or fuck, I made that mistake again, and so that's feeding that system. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then how do you break that? I know it's not a simple answer, correct? Because it's like if it was, you would write a book and you would make millions of dollars and people would...
Actually, it is simple. It just takes a lot of time. And so, the cognitive model is all about, essentially states this is all a learned process. So it can be unlearned. So what is maladaptive can be made adaptive to create those response sets that are desirable. And this is not just in performance sense, this is in a clinical setting too. So the whole cognitive model is really based around looking at serious mental illness like depression and anxiety disorders. And so if we can change the thought patterns of these individuals, we can also cultivate different emotional responses and behavioral responses. And so we can, step one is we need to first be aware of what these thought patterns are and how they again are either adaptive for us or maladaptive. And then step two is in beginning to really edit these, and so to again then create that shift emotionally and physiologically and behaviorally.
So let's break that down. 3 things. So and I'll forget this. So the maladaptive.
I can't do this. This is too hard. I'm never gonna win. X racer always beats me.
Okay, so that's the maladaptive. And
Sure.
then the adaptive.
I can do this. And not just to bullshit and lie to ourselves, but again, focus in on what the controllables are, those task things, and bring the attention there, which is going to create hopefully more ease. And then again, the focus is now directed onto what are the controllables and what we can do.
So in the moment, focus on the adaptive, the controllables. How does anger factor into it? So for example, making yourself pissed, fuck, I'm not going to fall into this maladaptive approach again. I'm going to, can anger be used in a positive way to change that or no? Is that a bad tool? Because I fear use anger, use certain tools that from lay people who aren't.
It depends on the athlete. It depends on their background. Anger for some people can be a great mobilizer for attention and for effort, and that sustained effort through hard things. But for other people, it can dysregulate them and actually interfere. So it just depends.
Okay. So we have maladaptive, adaptive, and then the physiology of it. Like, how does that? Where do you see that playing into it?
Yeah, it's all connected. Again, I mean, back in the 16th century with, Descartes, we separated mind and body and kind of specialized in working in one area versus the other. But anything that I'm thinking is having this mirrored response in my nervous system, my physiology, from these autonomic systems like heart rate, blood pressure, to, temperature, to, muscle tension. So this happens automatically. It's not even controlled. What was the question?
So if we're in a race and we see us going through that pattern again, right? We go through that pattern.
Okay.
We're telling ourselves, man, here we go again. I'm doing this again. I can't get to the front of the race. This guy's going to win again. I'm in a bad position. I'm making the wrong moves. So from the adaptive, we say, hey, at that point, we take it as it comes. Follow the process. Control the controllables. Like,
that's right.
Hey, I'm in the fucking back of the race. I need to be at the front of the race.
That's right.
Or, hey, I'm at the back. Let's put in the effort. And then the physiological thing that I see happen to a lot of athletes is it causes additional fatigue. It causes stress.
Yes.
They have cramping.
Yes.
Heart rate goes up.
Exactly.
Nutrition goes to shit.
Exactly.
And then they lose, all control of everything.
Exactly. So their attention now is in the wrong place. Exactly. And now they're exerting too much effort and they're in the wrong place. And that's not beneficial.
And so in a way to practice this, so obviously in a race environment, that's not the best way.
So here's what I would do with you or one of your athletes. And so I'd sit down with you and I'd have you just take a sheet of paper and think of a race in your mind that, I don't know, just really went terribly. But also I want to know about a race that went really, really well. Right? So we're kind of looking at sort of like these two ideas. But in the race that went maybe terribly, what were those automatic thoughts that came up? Like you just kind of scrolled through, like at the start line. This is even like before the race even started, right? Probably the night before, about kind of all this, a lot of this negative kind of thinking about our own inadequacies or self-doubts and things like that. And so we just kind of like write all those down. And then on the other side of the paper, we do this like editing process, right? And again, it's not to just like whitewash over it. It's not just, we're not lying to ourselves. What we are is we're trying to make it a more adaptable thought, which is then going to create, again, that response set that we're wanting to have under pressure. And so that thought of, Sally, she always wants to, or she's a climber, or I'm not a good climber.
Right.
Hey, I've had that thought.
Sure.
Is, well, maybe climbing is not my strength, but you know what? I'm gonna stay within my tempo and this zone, and I'm going to focus on really kind of coming up right here, right there, right? So it's not that we're saying I'm a great climber, but what are my strengths and what are these things that I can attend to at this time to create that different emotional, physiological, behavioral response set that we want, which is essentially to persist under times of duress, right?
So, I mean, that's great. That's exactly something tangible that people can take away and use. Like tomorrow, they can implement that. They can write down their race. They can, start to break it down and use that tomorrow. So I'm going to put you on the spot. What is the thing that you say to yourself when things go right? Like when you get to the start line, or whether the night before, the week before, what's the thing that you've struggled with personally?
Dang it, Roy.
Yeah. No, we ask hard questions here.
I've been racing for a long time. I've never really stopped. It's just the sports have changed. So I've gotten better and better at managing this. what I do for myself is I'll create a game plan the week before. And actually, this is something that I do with my coach, i.e. you, in combination, because I know the targets and things that I want to execute, given the conditions of the race. Doesn't matter so much on who's going to show up. And so then this is sort of this framework that I create in my mind, with some good self-talk techniques on like really these kind of efficient kind of verbal cues on what that looks like, saying that in the positive tense and the present tense, and also using imagery to really see that in my mind's eye and to practice that ideal response. That's how I do it.
So when you say imagery, are you talking about visualization?
Yes, but it's more than just eyes, right? We're using all of our senses, kinesthetic awareness, smell, taste, if there's any, sound is very important. So we're using all those senses in our imagery script to make it more real, because the more real it is, then the more real it is in our mind, then the more real it is in our body.
So when you say senses, because you're using all the senses basically, sight, sound, taste. So when you are you thinking of what it tastes like or smells like, or so that's your visualization. Hey, this is race day. This is the salt water. This is
I'm seeing the scene like in a big, big picture frame first, and noticing the smells, the sounds, like the electricity, the tension, kind of like in the air, what's going on in my own muscles. And then I pan down, in a more kind of narrow frame, and kind of focus more on my own heartbeat and regulating that, my own just kind of muscle tension and softening that, and my own mind on what is it I need to accomplish at that given time, and then the body just kind of follows.
So you take it from a broad approach, and then you bring it down to maybe the areas where you're like, hey, my heart rate, bring that down.
Technique.
Technique.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And so when I was taught visualization, which was probably like 14 or 15, we just lay down and we're in our mind and we're rehearsing, and it's really like not even that broad of a focus. It was just like, hey, think about how, being on the podium, think about how it is to win, so you're seeing yourself doing it, like you're on the outside looking in at yourself. But it sounds like your approach, or the approach today, because this is a long time ago, the approach now is to like be in it and to grab all the senses and then bring it down.
So we can do both. And naturally, some people are better, it's called external orientation versus internal orientation. Some people will just kind of naturally have just something that comes, easier to them. The research is still out on it. Is one better than the other? It's not conclusive yet. But we want to use both, really. And all of them are useful. And like you talked about imagery being done to visualize outcomes. And so being on the podium. And so that kind of imagery is to really cultivate that sense of competence and confidence. And what a great use, especially if someone is low in that area. But we also can use it to really master skill and technique, whether it's race tactics, and I need to make a specific move and certain kind of train. I want to see that in my mind's eye and rehearse that over and over again until it is just seamless and it's like I did it a million times. Or it can be, again, to manage uncomfortable or difficult things, adversity. And so if I'm, an Ironman, triathlete, and I get a flat in the race, how am I going to, again, ideally respond to that scenario the way I want to?
So that's interesting. So with that, if I lost my train of thought for a second there, though, but you're actually visualizing. An example, I'm doing a breakdown of a file, and most athletes who do well in road racing, in the last 20 minutes of the race, if that's where their best power numbers are, they're successful. But most racers, 80%, blow their power in the beginning. Everyone's hyper, they're so the tension, which causes them to waste a lot of power in that first hour. But those who do really well put that power effort near the end. By visualizing that, by seeing that, and then by working on releasing the tension, so in the first half of the game, the race, you're not blowing power all over the fucking place, and then you would visualize seeing yourself placing that near the end. Would that be a proper use?
Perfect. And especially from your analysis, be able to give that feedback to your athlete and say, I see this, see the data. We need to work on bringing your arousal level down at the start so that we can really have that acceleration at the end.
I'll tell you, like, as a coach, working with a lot of athletes, that's like the biggest game changer. Like, a lot of people start a race, whether it's an Ironman, they're starting an Ironman like it's a sprint. Road racers are starting a road race like it's a crit. Time trialists are starting like it's a kilo. And that's where a lot of people fail because of that. Like, that's where they want to look for other solutions too. They want to, like, I want more power, or I need to get stronger. All this bullshit, like, my nutrition's not good, and then they're buying all this crap. But in all reality, it comes down to the mental toolbox. I like to call it a mental toolbox because, like, what you're giving us is the tools that we can put into that and use. So I'm gonna. With what we just talked about, so visualization, imagery, where do you see that, like, in performance enhancing? Like, from a clinical standpoint, like, what have you read or noticed, like, how much, and I'm sorry, it's hard to quantify it, but how big is that play into sports performance?
Huge. Actually, there have been some great studies on it. And I think imagery, as far as the highest level athletes, professionals, Olympic athletes, is the single most used of the mental skills. Absolutely. So is that because they're better athletes and it's working for them, they're using it, or is it because the skill is actually helping them to be better?
Sure.
Chicken or egg, I don't know. But it's certainly helpful. And again, the more our training is it's these individual, just kind of these small things that's making the difference between, first place and fourth place.
Sure.
So,
or just showing up on race day.
absolutely.
I mean, some people don't even show up. So let's move on to, we talked a little bit about kind of something you learned in undergrad, then you moved to grad school, and I'm sure in grad school you had to do big research, probably write a bunch of papers, a book, whatever. What's the biggest takeaway, in grad school that you learned for sports performance?
Yeah. Sports performance and clinically, I'd still say it's probably the cognitive model, and really understanding that we can learn and unlearn these maladaptive ways of seeing the world, situations, ourselves, which then systematically then creates these different emotional, physiological, and behavioral response sets. So we can change how we feel by changing our thinking. It's not the situation that is going to define us, it's how we respond to the situation.
You mentioned two techniques that I can remember here. So one's writing it down, right? The maladaptive. And then and then the other one where you're just kind of laying down, tensing the body, going through that tension up and down. What's a third that you could think of, that maybe homework that you would be able to give somebody that they could take away tomorrow and use?
Yeah. Something that you already do with your athletes, goal setting. So a lot of people struggle with motivation. And meaning is attached to that. Why am I getting up at 4:30 every morning to go to work out? Why am I, spending 4 hours on my bike on a Saturday when I could be out at whatever, right? And so to have that meaning in what is we do and the why, that is hugely important for motivation and for persistence when things get hard and over time. Goal setting is a great and easy thing to remind us of those whys and to create those behavioral steps on how to do it.
So here's the issue that I have with athletes. I ask them to set the goals. I have paper. I have like a bunch of inspirational sayings on the fucking paper. I'm saying, hey, fill this out. It's online. You don't have to. All you have to do is click boxes. Give me goals. Why do you think people shy away from setting goals?
Because then they're accountable to following through with them.
I kind of knew the answer to that. I just want to throw it out there. So now I really want to dig into this a little bit because I think you're not a professional athlete.
No.
95% of the people, 99% of the people I work with are not professional athletes. 99% of people out there, 99.9% of people aren't professional athletes. They hire coaches. They want us to give them the tools to be successful and all this. But so, what drives you, like you personally? So you hired me a year ago.
Yeah.
And you had some goals and you had some stuff, but you've been in sports for a long time. You've had other coaches. You've been around, obviously, higher performing athletes from the psychological, physiological. What drives you? Like, what causes you to get up every day? I mean, let me set the stage even further. So, a year ago, she hired me. She was going to do Worlds, and then she went on to Nationals. You can watch our other podcast if you want to find out how she did. But at the end of the day, it's a little plug on my other podcast, but at the end of the day, it's like she came to me, she's starting a program in like there's a lot of work to be done. She's around a lot of athletes, she's a professional, she has a personal relationship, all these different things, but she's still driving to something like a big, it's massive, like that most people wouldn't even fathom doing, and you're gonna make no money. You're actually paying to do this. Like you're paying me, you're paying bike shops, you're paying and it's not cheap, so what's that driver for you, like all these years, because you've been an athlete for a long time?
It's fun, and I love the process of continuously learning and getting better. And so sport for me is one of the best vehicles to practice that, because it's always pushing my edges, and not just physically but mentally. And that is exposure therapy, for a psychologist. It's to really be out in the hard and see how you respond, see how I respond and how I want to respond. And then the cool thing is then when that happens for me, it just creates this upward spiral of wanting to do even more. That's what positive reinforcement is, right? And continues to really kind of reinforce that underlying kind of motivation and meaning for what it is that I do, and the time and money and the sacrifices that go into it. But at the end of the day, it's fun to learn and to push edges, because only when I'm pushing my edges that I am learning and growing. And if I'm not, that means I'm too comfortable, and probably I'm stagnant.
So when you say push the edges, so when you say that, does that mean suffering?
Yes, I think it's in the bike culture that I learned suffering is like a badge of honor. It's pretty messed up. Yeah. And it's something about endurance athletes that I've come to admire and love. But there is something about this human potential, this pursuit to see how far we can go. And I don't think we've even seen, we're just figuring that out right now.
So do you think that, and that's good, do you think that from a physiological standpoint, maybe we're hitting the edges, right? They're trying to run a marathon under 2 hours or something like that, and then you see these people doing crazy things in Ironman and whatever, but do you think we're just, from a physiological standpoint, we're on the edges, but from a mental standpoint, there's so much more? Or do you think it's kind of both, hey, physiologically we're not there, mentally we're not there? Or do you think, because in my opinion, I think the mental side is where that's the governor, that's the limiter. Somebody that I listen to quite a bit says we only really use 40% of our potential, but our mind cuts us off there. So where do you think that that means we have 60% of growth, where in the physiological sectors like VO2 max, all this stuff, we have I can only get to X. But if I start to work my mind, build that mental toolbox, stop being a mental midget, then I can get 60% more. Is that?
I love this question, and I don't know the answer to it, but it's chicken or egg. Is the mind the real limiter to our physiology, or is it the physiology that's limiter to our minds? I believe it's both. So we'll see. I will continue to figure that out.
Now, in your work now, you work at, can we say where you work?
Yeah.
You work at the IMG Academy? And at the IMG Academy, what is your work detail? Like, what do you do? What's your daily routine right now?
So I'm the consulting psychologist for IMG Academy. I actually am employed by Johns Hopkins Old Children's Hospital. So at IMG Academy, my job is directing the clinical psychology program, and so that's basically working individually, so individual psychotherapy with our student athletes. And we board there from 6th grade all the way to post-grad, so this is from about 12-year-olds to 19-year-olds, coming from 70 countries around the world, all of which are athletes and scholars. And so they're in their specific sport training half day, and then they're in school half day. And then they travel extensively for competition. Facilities are incredible. It's really kind of the ideal setting to, for someone who wants to go as far as they can possibly go in their sport.
So, what's your day, like, paint us a picture of your day. Like, what is your day, like, a typical day include for you?
Typical day is seeing individual student athletes in psychotherapy back to back.
Really? So like an hour session, 30-minute session?
Yeah, 45-minute sessions. There's a lot of consultation in between there that happens with the IMG system, i.e. coaches, i.e. teachers, i.e. campus life, like house parents, i.e. our health services department, which are our docs and nurses. And so it's helping to give awareness and training to the campus community about really what mental health is, what some of these mental health issues are that these youth have that are there, so that they can also respond better.
So it's really on the mental health aspect versus like motivation and like imagery, things we kind of, this is more so on the mental health aspect, depression, overly driven type of thing where they're, maybe just focused on one thing, and so it's their mental well-being.
Yeah, it's so. You can break it down for you. So, I work with about 20% of the population in psychotherapy, and half of them are presenting with subclinical issues. So these are more than just performance issues. Even though they might come in wanting performance enhancement type work, 99.9% of the time, that turns into interpersonal relationship issues. It turns into something that's actually anxiety is not just manifesting in their sport, but actually it's also manifesting in other areas of their life. And so it really is more of a clinical concern versus simply a performance enhancement concern.
So for junior athletes, and this was always something that I was concerned about. Like, I started sports when I was 10. You started when you were, did you say 3 or something?
5.
Yeah, 5.
Yeah.
So we're starting really early, and we're seeing like parents, because we're the drivers, right? Like push children in certain directions. I, growing up in that situation, am very aware of that. So like if I get a junior athlete, we try to make it more fun, but yeah, fun is discipline as well. Mm-hmm. But too much discipline too soon, and so forth and so on. An error that maybe parents may be making, not related to IMG and the people you're seeing, but in general, for parents out there, like, is it as simple as, hey, you're pushing your kid too hard? They shouldn't be going on every travel team. They shouldn't be, at 10 years old. Let them play. Let them experience a lot of things. Like, what's your take on that?
Overall, I would say what parents are doing wrong is that they are focused too heavily on outcomes. And so, did you win the race? They're focused on that too much, versus the how. and the process of doing that. And so what I would like parents to do more of is to be attuned and then reinforcing the process of success. So these are things like effort, these are things like attitude, these are things like, hey, you know, I saw you execute XYZ skills consistently in practice today. Way to go.
And then 5th place trophies. So like it's the thing that's out there now, like, right? Like, we'll get back to that in a second. So I want to go back. I want to just kind of expand on what you just said. Like, so me growing up, that was the only focus, right? Like, my dad was like, "How did you do? What place did you get?" And so, like, I've worked my way out of that. So my whole focus used to be placing, winning. So I would drive myself to crazy extremes as a wrestler, losing weight, practice, which was great. It made me drive. Like, I would practice 4 times a day. I would drive, because that answer that I wanted to give to him was, I won.
Yep.
Right? I didn't want to give another answer. Where, one, that caused a lot of stress, which eventually probably lessened my performance because I wasn't free to play. Like, when athletes come to me and they're like really tense and all, they're not free to play. Like, if you're free to play, performance follows, in my opinion. I'm not
I agree.
I'm just a coach, but so what you just said kind of reiterated that. Like, that was my dad's focus: is how did you do? And I'm like, and then he even does it now. Like, how did you do? I'm like, hey, I raced really well. Like, I know now, so like I raced really well and I took 18th. He's like, oh, well, maybe next time. Like, fuck you next time, man. Like, I raced really well.
I executed my performance goals.
There's 70 people who lined up today. Every one of them wanted to win. So I'm like, but then I learned that through time. And a lot of us, we still don't know that. Like, I have athletes that come to me and they're like, well, I didn't win. Yeah, man, but how did you feel? Like, my first question always is, how did you feel? I never ask anyone how they did in the sense of, did you win? Like, how did you feel? And then after that, I want the results, because we're in a results-driven society, so that comes partly to this next question, 5th place trophies. Like, in my opinion, so let me help you, throw out a bunch of info. I think it's garbage. Like, I think that we have to I don't think that it makes us, like, it doesn't define me if I don't get on the podium, but it has to be a podium of X, like 3 people is typically it, in most traditions. Like, everyone on Susie's soccer team shouldn't get a ribbon, but we should explain why. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. And that's one of my biggest issues is the participation award. I think this came from, the last maybe 10, 20 years of this kind of idea to try to build up self-esteem in kids. And so, any attempt was great, like, you're a winner. But I think we are reinforcing, again, the wrong thing. And so now, as we can be more specific on what it is we're reinforcing, then we can get that balance right. I mean, it's not that we're saying that, you're a schlump because, you weren't top 30. No, but let's really kind of be specific on what those skills, again, are that are required and the discipline to be in the top 3. And then that's what we build and practice and reinforce.
Yeah, that's right there from a genius. So I'm kind of biased on that. But all right, so great. So we've talked about your journey, basically where you started from, swimming. We talked about undergrad, what you learned. Pretty much, it kind of parlayed into grad school. Let me go through just a few quick questions then. A really good book that you could recommend for athletes to read, like maybe 1 or 2 that you know of, that would be a great book for athletes to read.
Great introductory sports psych book. If you're interested, Mind Gym. I'm into this book right now called Endurance. It talks a lot, it's actually about physiology and a little bit of psychology. It's fascinating, so you'd love it.
Mind Gym, Endurance, so that'll be on my list. And then for you, like this last year, you had some pretty good success. I just want to outline this, and we'll kind of wrap it up here. But so this is what Dr. Val's week kind of looked like, a typical week for her. Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, master swim, so she put about an hour in. And then Tuesday, Thursday on the bike, some pretty intense intervals, always focused on intervals, typically on those Tuesdays and Thursdays. Every now and then we stole a swim and we made it a ride, so we did 3 rides because we needed a little bit more ride time. And then on the weekends it was always cycling, long distance, typically one day long distance group ride, and then the second day a solo ride. Really put in a lot of effort. So every day, I mean, you were very consistent. Like, she's really for me, for the type of athletes that I like to coach, she would be perfect in the sense that, one, I didn't have to teach her how to swim, because that would be very bad. I just really work with her on the bike only, and what set you up for success was that whatever the workout called for, you did it. Like, you can't, if it said 2 times 20 minutes, you knocked it out. Boom, 2 times 20 minutes. Like it was your mission. And then on the weekends, if I gave you certain parameters, you nailed it. Like, what does that? Like, what drives you to that? Like, how do you, like, I have athletes that they don't do that. Like, they don't. They may want to, and they may think they do, and they tell me they do, but data says otherwise. And you're kind of data driven to a point. Like, you want to know about it. We met a couple times. You're fascinated by it, but you weren't really geeked out by it. So you're not crazy, but like, in the sense, like, what drove you every day? Like, you were 99%. Like, you did every single thing. So how do you do that?
For me, it's just being really clear on my why, and so that goes back to goal setting. And I do that at the start of every year, but also I do check-ins, probably quarterly, to make sure that I'm still in line with that mission for me. Because when that's clear, the motivations just follow. But also I'm really, I'm really maybe even too rigid sometimes on kind of like my time and plan, and I can do that right now because I don't have like a lot of other people kind of like asking things from me outside of work. And so I go to bed like early, and so that I can have that sleep that I need to wake up refreshed and not have excuses. And I had limited time, so I knew that I wanted to like maximize that, and I was paying for it, so like there was value, like, and I wanted to
So
do that.
The why is the biggest thing. That's the motivator, right? Like, motivation, in my opinion, is fleeting. Like, I listen to something, it motivates me. This motivates me, but
inspires you. It doesn't motivate.
There was my. So it's in their motivation, inspiration. So define that.
Well, this is not a necessarily psychologically derived definition, but. Yeah, I mean, we can be inspired by outside. And actually, so back to kind of like how we develop self-esteem or self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is that sense of belief that I can do the task, that I can fulfill the job, whatever that is, right? And so biggest part of that comes from past experience of success, right? And so confidence is really what self-efficacy is. And so if we have that, we're more likely to have self-efficacy going into the race or whatever that tough condition is. Now, when that's not there, another way that we can build that is by outside support and by outside validation. So there is something to that. When I am lacking in past experience, that I can kind of boost that up by that external validation. So that can be from a great mentor, teacher, coach, parent, whatever that is. So in a way, we can use other people to kind of scaffold us to do that, but in the long run, that alone is insufficient. And we need to have that internal kind of driver, which comes from really both of those, and that meaning why, that's really going to be that lasting motivation that we're looking for.
And so the why, that, from my experience working with athletes, the why has to come from you. Like, the mistake that I see people do is, my buddies are doing it, all my girlfriends are doing it, we're all going to do it. And then if it's a 5K, okay, we're doing couch 5K, that's great. But when you have to be selfish with your why. Like, you have to be selfish. This is why I'm doing it. I am racing for me. I am doing this for me. And you have to be selfish. And you have to be selfish with that time, but you have to manage that time. For example, like what I tell athletes is, I understand they give me the bullshit excuse. I have family, this and this. And that's not bullshit, but it is. It's an excuse that you make because it's unhealthy not to have your own thing, in my opinion. Like, and that doesn't have to be sport. It could be like puzzle making, whatever. But an hour. You took an hour a day, basically, Monday through Friday, and then you took a few hours on the weekends. But the only time that you wavered from that is when you needed to give time to other things, significant other, school, work, family, and that's great. But outside of that, you were very, you were selfish. You were selfish with that, and that's because you knew your why.
And because I had a support group who supported my why. And so that's key. We have to have our family members be able to support that why for us. And so when we go into that first year, goal setting, we get together a coach. If we don't have that agreement also from our family, then that could be a tremendous obstacle for an athlete.
That's gold right there, because a lot of times I hear it all the time that the family's not on the same page.
Yeah.
The husband or the wife is doing this,
Yeah.
but never really. I don't say ask but you should include them. Say, hey, honey, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to take an hour here. And I can tell you, for me, it's a tough dynamic. So I get up early. Like, people are like, why do you get up at 4 or 4:30? Because that is less intrusive on my family. Mm-hmm. And then on the weekends I give back. I set my schedule up so that way, and that's. I think people, they get selfish with it, and it becomes unhealthy. It's a balance. So I think what you're saying is balance. You have to balance it, because then that why becomes a negative thing.
Yeah. Balance, and make sure that your support system is included in that, and everyone agrees. Yeah.
And that's like, my motivation will get sucked down.
Exactly.
When I have something out of balance. If it's if I get selfish and just train and I leave my athletes, then that makes my motivation go away. Or, my wife, if I do something and then she gets that, I can't be clear. So that's another part of that mental toolbox.
Yeah.
So having that all together. So great. So then you know your why, you're inspired. Do you ever have that point where you're just really down in the dumps? Like, it's really pulling you down. Like, I think I know the answer, but do you have this point where it really brings you down, or where you're like, man, I'm done with it? Or are you always like that clear?
No, I'm that clear. However, there was a point in my life which was life-changing for me, where I was at my lowest, and it was after an injury. So it really disrupted kind of my sporting life. It made me question a lot about my own identity. So that was different, though.
Sure. Well, the thing is, it disrupted your life.
It disrupted who I was.
So interesting. So sports, competing is who you are. Like, not competing in the sense of like doing a race or an event, but competing with yourself, like challenging yourself, like you said before, pushing those edges.
Yeah, I think for a lot of athletes, and certainly the ones that I work with, probably that you work with too, being an athlete is a huge part of identity. So I'm a husband, I'm a dad, I'm an athlete.
Sure.
Right? And so, and who knows what that hierarchy looks like, and everyone's is different. But injury is something that really can be life-changing, and kind of, as far as loss, not only do we have a loss of functioning, but now we have a loss of identity. But as far as now, no issues. I'm clear on, what I love, what I want to do, how I want to spend my time. It's not a burden for me to say that, I'm going to wake up at 4:30 because I love, hanging out with like my social group also, that kind of, who also does this thing that I love to do.
Awesome. Well, I mean, this has been like phenomenal. Like, I think we learned a lot. I think people learned a lot. Like really from an endurance athlete. Like one thing that I like about you is you're a practitioner. You practice it. You don't just preaching it. Like I've listened to some people who sports psych people and they preached it, but I like practitioners. They actually do it. Like you train, you adhere to it, you're in it. And that's really the people. I don't do a lot of interviews because I want to talk to people who are practitioners, and it's hard to find that. People in the sport. Like if you're not doing it, it's hard to, tell people. It's hard to, like, I can't tell people to do things unless I do it. Like, and you're doing it. Like you live it every day. And it's interesting. Like, I have people every day. They lack motivation. They like this. They like that. But I think you gave them some clarity. Like they have to find a why. They have to make sure that they have the support system that backs them. The anxieties that people have, how to maybe tackle that, how to tackle when they're in the moment, how to fix those things, important visualization, how to visualize. We went over like a million things in this. You'll probably have to listen to it 15 times. But the last thing I want to do is, I want to end on this and then let you add anything you want to add. But the thing I want to is race week. What does your race week look like from a mental standpoint, starting from Monday and you race on a Saturday? So what do you do race week? Because I know what I tell people to do, and maybe fed a little bit to you. And I'm not talking every race. I'm talking your A race. This is it. You just trained. You're doing Ironman. You're doing, the biggest event, World Championship, National, that Monday. And it may start another day, but let's just keep it within like 7 days. What does your race week look like?
Yeah, race week. I am making sure to control as much as I can the distractions, the stress, making sure that my nutrition is on point, my sleep is on point, getting my gear on point, and then it goes to getting my mind on point. I'm resting my body at this point. Usually I'm tapering a little bit. So this is where I start doing, just with a journal, game plan. Game plan being what are my goals as far as outcome goals, and then how do I get that? So that goes into pacing, that goes into technique, that goes into strategy. How do I want to manage hardship that happens in the race? That is from my own just suffering to external things, whether it's weather conditions or other racers or other things like that. So that is something that I think about and also visualize. And really, it's just kind of that whole week I'm really getting excited because I'm really thinking about the race and really seeing it like go the way that I want to, and and then I show up on race day. I usually actually don't sleep very well, like not the night before, but the pre-night before, because I'm just excited. But I interpret those butterflies as a positive thing, that my body is ready. Or I used to interpret that as a negative thing, and that affected me differently. But then, it's race day, and I just remind myself how much I love being in this environment, that, the harder it is, the more, like, I'm going to grow and learn from that, and that's what I'm here to do. And so let's just put it all out there.
And that's great. Like, a lot of people, they focused on a lot of other things, like changing things up or adding things, but you're just kind of solidifying what you've done, solidifying what you know, being on top of nutrition, on top of rest, on top of the mental game, and then excited. Like, I can see you're excited because you're excited talking about it.
Yeah.
Where I'll talk to some people, because I see people every day, whether I coach them or not, it doesn't matter, they're athletes, and I'll say, hey, you got a race coming up, and they're like, yeah, I can't wait to get it over. Like how do you, like, that's, to me, like, I would not do that. Like, I can't wait to get it over. Like, I'm excited to race. I'm excited to be, just like you are, for that event. I'm excited for that to happen. And I think that some of that obviously is the mindset, but also some of that's the training, because they just want to be over it.
So the first thing that comes to my mind, if someone were to say that, is that they're too aroused, which means there's anxiety and or fear for the race. And how come? Is that because of under preparation, or is that because of simply the idea of failure is presenting this anxiety or looking bad? And as human beings, ego certainly can create a lot of anxiety and fear, and that threat of being exposed and looking bad, potentially being criticized, humiliated, rejected, what have you. And so I'd want to understand more about that.
And I think I mean, for the people that I'll analyze them. You know, I have the background to do so, but it's a lot of ego. A lot of times it's ego. They don't want to look bad. They don't want to post that bad result. They don't want, you know, for me, obviously I'll talk about myself, like it used to be that way. Like my dad would ask me, hey, what did you do? And I'm like, and so that's ingrained in me. And if I don't show up at first, it's never good enough. And a lot of people were raised that way. But I think that, like for me, and it's carried over to everything I do. I don't really give a fuck what everybody says. I don't care. Like if I post something, or if somebody, you know, back when I started doing what I do in bike fitting and coaching, people would, you know, it's always a hot topic, right? It's always like, in sports psych, it's probably a hot topic too when you get in those realms, and especially with social media, people want to post stuff, and I'm like, I don't really care what people say, and I think that carries over to sport. It's not only sport, it's not only life, it's life and sport. It comes together. Like if you care in life, if your ego, if you care always what you look like, if you or you value the opinion of others, because you can care what your appearance is, you know, but you value the opinion of others more than you value yourself. Like that's where you shouldn't care. This is your own thing.
So there's actually something in sports psych literature called goal attribution theory, and it talks about motivational types and these drivers of different athletes, different people. And one is ego-based, and this type of athlete is motivated by winning, by outcomes, by stats, by prestige, by external motivators, validation, right? And so that's going to mobilize and motivate them. However, when that's not happening, we really see that frustration come up, and that persistent and effort and motivation drop. So we also have this kind of task mastery goal orientation, and that's that person who is focused on, again, kind of these process-driven goals. And so it's not so much on outcomes that, again, are out of our control, essentially, but are based on these things that, again, like effort, like attitude, like skills, technique, strategy. And when I do these things, that's a good race. And so when I'm dealing with people who are overly kind of ego-oriented, really have to do a lot of maybe work potentially on that, getting that attention focused more on those, again, those process-oriented mechanisms. And then that kind of helps them then be more tolerant in those hard places where then energy and their motivation would drop.
What about the opposite? If they're process-driven, do you want to focus more on the opposite of results?
Sometimes, yeah, because sometimes they might need a little more kind of, again, arousal, a little more activation. And so, so we can kind of carrot them a little bit on, okay, you're doing X, Y, and Z, and let's go for podium this time.
Sure. It makes sense, because you always, typically, what you need is in the like you push against the opposite. Like if you're not focused on the process, pushing towards the process. If you're focused on the process, pushing towards a result. You know, it's a balance. Obviously, you don't want to just like. I've seen coaches that's all they care about is that result. That, you know, that's the first thing that comes to the mind, or the athlete, whatever, not just the coach. So, all right, I think that's it. Now, I mean, I could go on, but we won't steal any more of your time because I know it's valuable, and we have some cool stuff coming up tonight. So, is there anything else you want to add? I mean, I can't thank you enough for taking the time and doing this. I mean, I learned a ton. I'm sure everyone else did. So.
No, thank you. It's been a blast.
Awesome. Well, that's all we have from AeroPro Coaching. I want to thank Dr. Val. We're here at the Bikery, and we're going to see Bob Rold here tonight, maybe some other special guests. And stay tuned, and like always, up your watts. Yeah, I want to get somebody to do something that they never thought was possible.
Chaos, we change our minds.